Passion has always been seen as something sublime, a state of ecstasy that promises happiness and meaning. But for Nietzsche, it's not a divine gift, rather a fire that burns more than it illuminates. He reminds us that passion doesn't ask for balance, doesn't negotiate, doesn't accept measures. It demands everything, and the moment it demands everything, it already begins to destroy. How many times hasn't someone lost themselves in the name of overwhelming love? How many haven't abandoned projects, friends, and even their own identity when surrendering to the intensity of desire? Passion reveals, like lightning that splits the sky, our powerlessness before ourselves. It shows how much we aren't masters of what we feel, but hostages to deep, irrational, and often cruel forces. Nietzsche doesn't invite us to fear passion, but to face it as a test. It's a trial of our capacity to endure life's intensity without succumbing. And what if passion wasn't love, but a form of destruction? Would you have the courage to face it head-on? If this type of reflection resonates with you, subscribe to the channel and follow us on this journey to the darkest heart of the human soul. Passion arrives like a wildfire. Suddenly, what seemed calm, stable, predictable is taken by a flame that grows and spreads without asking permission. At first, there's warmth, light, a glow that gives life. The passionate person feels reborn, as if each gesture were a revelation and each instant brought unprecedented meaning. But just like fire, passion never contents itself with merely warming. It advances, devours, demands constant fuel until the intensity becomes unbearable. Nietzsche saw in this passion's paradoxical nature. It's vital, but also fatal. Whoever has lived a passion knows it awakens an almost superhuman energy, a desire to surrender that makes one forget limits, schedules, commitments. It's as if life condensed into a single presence, a single body, a single gaze. However, the more this flame grows, the more it threatens to destroy what it should sustain. Intense love can become poison, because excess of life often leads to the death of something. The death of serenity, clarity, independence. Nietzsche didn't see this as moral condemnation, but as existential fact. Passion is dangerous precisely because it yanks us from our comfort zones. Human beings seek security, repeat habits, wear masks to endure life. But when swept away by passion, they discover themselves vulnerable, fragile, disarmed. In this sense, passion not only consumes, but unmasks. It shows that behind the appearance of self-control, there exists a being surrendered to the randomness of instincts. Passion's fire also blinds. When someone falls in love, they tend to idealize the object of their desire. The beloved person stops being just a real individual and becomes a symbol, an absolute. The mind projects perfections, creates unrealistic expectations, and builds an image that doesn't correspond to what really exists. It's at this point that fire becomes dangerous. The passionate one doesn't see the other, but only their own fantasy reflected. When reality emerges, frustration inevitably arrives. Just as fire leaves ashes, passion often leaves remains of burned illusions. Nietzsche, in his critique of traditional morality, pointed out that living intensely was accepting the risks of excess. However, he also warned about the trap of self-deception. Passion, while vitalizing, can reduce the individual to a state of dependency and loss of themselves. The fire that should warm transforms into a blaze that consumes the subject itself. Imagine someone who abandons career, friends, and even personal values in the name of overwhelming passion. At first, everything seems sublime, proof of radical surrender. But with time, what remains is often emptiness, a trail of emotional and social destruction. Nietzsche provokes us to ask, is this really love, or just a form of self-annihilation masked as greatness? The fire metaphor also reveals something essential. One cannot maintain an eternal flame without burning something. The passionate person lives in constant tension between the need to feed the fire and the fear of being consumed by it. And perhaps it's exactly this tension that makes passion so fascinating. Because in it, one lives life's extreme, even though the price is proximity to ruin. Deep down, passion is a brutal reminder that life cannot be totally controlled. It explodes where least expected, takes over spaces we thought we dominated. That's why Nietzsche considered passion a revealing force, because it shows we aren't masters of ourselves. We're crossed by greater forces, by instincts that don't ask permission, and passion's fire is one of the most intense ways to experience them. Living passion, then, isn't seeking balance, but enduring intensity. Whoever expects peace from passion is condemned to disappointment. But whoever accepts that it's an inevitable fire can learn from the ashes that remain after the blaze. Nietzsche wouldn't advise us to extinguish the flame, but to endure the heat, to learn to dance among the blazes without expecting to emerge unscathed. In the end, the fire that consumes also illuminates. It reveals what was hidden, exposes fragilities, destroys illusions. And perhaps that's its deepest function, to burn what's false so only what resists life's heat remains. When passion arrives, it doesn't ask permission. It invades, drags, and above all, strips bare. There's no way to remain the same before such intense force. Nietzsche saw in passion a phenomenon capable of tearing away the masks we use to survive in society. We are almost always actors in daily theatre. We smile when we don't want to, accept when we wish to refuse, build an image so others believe we're stronger, more balanced, more rational than we really are. But passion, like a sharp blade, cuts these illusions and reveals what lies beneath. The passionate person stops being master of themselves. A person who, before, took pride in their discipline and rationality can suddenly find themselves crying, begging, living on expectations, suffering from the absence of messages or phone calls. Passion exposes this fragility brutally. It's as if it said, "See, you were never as firm as you thought. Behind your armor there's a vulnerable, dependent, needy human being." Nietzsche didn't write for comfort. He didn't seek to offer self-help advice or wellness recipes. His philosophy was a hammer, and with it, he wanted to break illusions. When speaking about passion, he makes us face this uncomfortable truth. The more we believe ourselves strong, the more easily we're dismantled by it. It's a cruel paradox. How many stories don't exist of people who, amid intense passion, completely change their routine? An exemplary professional who begins neglecting their work, a faithful friend who suddenly becomes absent, a calm person who, moved by jealousy, explodes in fits of rage. Passion not only modifies behaviors, but reveals something that was always there, latent, hidden behind social conventions. Nietzsche could say that passion is a test of authenticity. When it erupts, the civilizing veneer cracks, and underneath appears instinct. We discover we're not so rational, that we don't have that much control, that our will to dominate life is more fragile than we'd like to admit. This revelation hurts because it wounds human pride. We like to believe we're masters of our choices, but passion proves otherwise. And here's the most disturbing point. By tearing away our masks, passion shows us not only what we hid from others, but also what we hid from ourselves. Often, it's not society that's deceived, but the individual themselves. They think themselves balanced, but discover themselves obsessive, believe themselves independent, but show themselves submissive, judge themselves free, but see themselves trapped by a gaze, a word, a body. This unmasking has something violent about it. It's as if passion were a force that obliges us to face a cruel mirror without filters. The reflection that appears there isn't always beautiful. It can be humiliating. It can be desperate. That's why many flee from passion, prefer the comfort of lukewarm relationships, predictable routines, because they know, even unconsciously, that they wouldn't bear to see themselves stripped this way. However, Nietzsche didn't propose flight. For him, life worthy of being lived is one that faces danger, that exposes itself to the risk of falling. Passion, in this sense, isn't just a curse, but also an opportunity for deep knowledge. If you truly want to know yourself, it's not enough to meditate in silence or reflect distantly. You need to see yourself taken by lack of control, feel vulnerable, lose certainties, and only then observe what emerges from this chaos. The mask torn away by passion is therefore a painful gift. It reveals how fragile and contradictory we are, but also shows us there's more in us than we'd like to admit. We're abysses disguised as calm surface. We're storms, hidden behind polite smiles. Passion doesn't create these storms, it only awakens them. And that's where Nietzsche's philosophy touches deepest. He challenges us not to deny this truth, but to embrace it. Because authenticity is born precisely at the moment when we can no longer hide what we are. If passion tears away our masks, perhaps it's not just destruction, but also revelation. If there's something Nietzsche unveiled with brutal clarity, it was that behind the sweetest appearances, there's always a game of forces, a silent dispute of power. And passion, however romantic it may seem, doesn't escape this rule. On the contrary, it's one of the most intense fields where this struggle manifests. When someone falls in love, they believe they're living a meeting of souls, a pure surrender, almost sacred. But if we look with Nietzsche's eyes, we'll see something else. A war disguised as surrender, a relationship of possession, domination and submission that hides under love's name. The will to power, a central concept in Nietzschean thought, isn't restricted to politics, war, or art. It infiltrates every human gesture. Every living being seeks to expand, impose their form on the world, conquer territory, even if that territory is emotional. To love, in this sense, isn't just wanting the other's good, but also wanting the other to belong to us, to be an extension of our own will. That's why, when we're in love, we feel jealousy. Jealousy is nothing more than the anguish of perceiving we don't totally dominate the object of our desire. They can escape, can turn to another, can betray us. Passion, thus, is always accompanied by this tension of power. We want the other to be free, but not so free as to abandon us. We want them to desire us, but we also desire to be the only possibility for them. This paradox generates suffering, because deep down we know we cannot possess anyone completely. Nietzsche would say that, when loving, we try to transform the other into our work of art, molding them according to our expectations. But the other, being also will to power, resists, imposes their own form, and it's in this friction that the game is born. Behind a passionate kiss may be an attempt at domination. Behind a promise of eternity may be the desire to imprison. Behind a renunciation may be the will to manipulate. Just observe intense relationships to perceive this. A couple that lives in constant fights but cannot separate is, in truth, trapped in this clash of forces. Each gesture of affection can carry within it a dose of demand. Each act of surrender can require, in return, submission. It's as if, when falling in love, the individual said, "I want you, but I also want you to be my way, for you to bow to my desire." And naturally the other responds, "I want you, but I also want you to adapt to me, to fit into my dreams, to belong to me." Nietzsche saw in this a form of brutal honesty of life. There's no pure, disinterested, transparent love. There is, yes, will to power disguised as affection. This doesn't mean love is false, but that it's more complex and darker than we'd like to admit. When someone says, "I love you," perhaps they're saying, without realizing, "I want you to be mine. I want you to confirm me. I want you to exist for me." This power game, however, isn't necessarily negative. It can be creative, can generate growth, can propel us. But for this, we need courage to look at it without illusions. When we pretend passion is only surrender, we become hostages to invisible manipulations. When we recognize there's power at play, we can choose how to deal with it. We can transform struggle into dance, into creative movement, instead of destructive war. Nietzsche, when speaking about love and passion, never reduced them to sentimentalisms. He knew their vital forces, but also dangerous forces. To love is to enter combat, even if silent. Passion is the battlefield, where it's decided who will mold whom, who will dominate whom, and often the result is destruction. However, it's precisely this destruction that reveals human truth. Ask yourself, when you've been in love, how much did you really want the other's good? And how much did you want the other to be yours, only yours? How much generosity was there, and how much desire for possession? These questions are uncomfortable, but essential, because in them lies the key to understanding passion as Nietzsche saw it, not as a fairy tale, but as an arena of forces. In the end, passion shows us that love isn't a safe refuge, but a risk. It's struggle, it's tension, it's game. And perhaps it's precisely this hidden power game that makes it so irresistible. Because, when loving, we feel not only the warmth of surrender, but also the vertigo of dispute, the excitement of conquering, the anguish of losing, the pleasure of dominating, and the fear of being dominated. Passion, therefore, isn't peace. It's war disguised as embrace. The beginning of passion usually seems like freedom. Who hasn't felt more alive, bolder, more open to the world when falling in love? It's as if suddenly all colors intensified, all sounds rang clearer, and life gained an unprecedented flavor. Passion gives us wings, but, as Nietzsche would warn, these wings don't take us to heaven. They can lead us to a vertiginous fall. What begins as expansion often ends as prison. Nietzsche saw in this passion's contradictory nature. At the same time, it yanks us from monotony. It also chains us to the object of desire. The passionate person no longer belongs to themselves. Each thought, each gesture, each decision begins to orbit around someone. The I begins to disappear to give place to a suffocating we. And the paradox is cruel. The more intense the passion, the narrower the individual's life becomes. This prison isn't made of visible bars, but of internal bonds. It's the anxiety that arises when the other delays responding. It's the emptiness felt in the absence of a look. It's the constant fear of losing. The passionate person lives in a state of vigilance, slave to signs, words, and silences. They convince themselves they're living the apex of amorous freedom, but in reality have become prisoner of a game they don't control. Nietzsche could say that misdirected passion is a deviation of will to power. Instead of expanding, the subject reduces themselves, shrinks, concentrates all their vital energy on a single point. They stop being creator to become dependent. They abandon their projects, their ideals, their own singularity to live according to a desire that never completely satisfies itself. Excess surrender becomes renunciation of oneself. In practice, this manifests in very concrete ways. Think of someone who begins molding their schedules according to their partners, who stops seeing friends to avoid displeasing, who gives up dreams because they fear the other won't accept them. Gradually, life shrinks, and what seemed like an overwhelming flight reveals itself as a golden cage. Passion, at this point, is no longer creative flame, but invisible chain. Nietzsche wouldn't condemn this prison as moral sin, but would see it as a loss of potency, a diminished life. The human being who annuls themselves in passion's name doesn't become nobler, but more fragile. They're not living intensely, they're just surviving through the other. And the more they depend, the more they fear losing, the more they suffer with the idea of absence. That's why, in passion, desire rarely calms down. On the contrary, it grows into obsession. The passionate person wants to always be together, always close, always in contact. But this insistence suffocates, wears down, consumes. The other stops being person to become object of necessity. Love, which should be space of creation, becomes anxious prison. Nietzsche invites us to reflect. Why do we call this love? Wouldn't it be more honest to say it's fear? Fear of being alone, fear of facing emptiness, fear of living without that presence that became essential. And yet, the more someone tries to imprison, the more fragile the relationship becomes. Desire, when it transforms into prison, corrodes the very freedom that should sustain the encounter between two beings. But there's a possibility of overcoming in this abyss. Nietzsche believed true strength lies in transforming passion into something creative, instead of letting ourselves be dominated by it. This doesn't mean coldly controlling desire, but learning to endure it without annulling ourselves. It's possible to love without being slave, desire without imprisoning, surrender without disappearing. The difference lies in the posture before passion. Either it's chain or it's fire that illuminates one's own path. The challenge, then, is perceiving the moment when desire stops being expansion and becomes prison. This recognition requires courage, because often we're so enchanted by intensity that we confuse dependency with love. Nietzsche provokes us to break with this illusion. To truly love, for him, would be to love creatively, capable of affirming life instead of diminishing it. In the end, passion's great risk isn't the suffering of loss, but the loss of oneself. Because when desire becomes prison, we stop living as full individuals to exist only as shadows of another. And that's perhaps the greatest destruction passion can cause. Not the end of a relationship, but forgetting one's own life. Nietzsche didn't believe in harmless feelings. For him, everything truly alive carries within itself a dose of danger. Passion in this sense isn't just excess that leads to ruin, it's also a process of revelation. It destroys, yes, but by destroying, it shows. Passion is like a storm. It tears off roofs, knocks down walls, floods streets. But when it passes, the scenery reveals what was hidden, what facades covered. Many fear this process. They prefer lukewarm loves, predictable relationships, domesticated feelings. But Nietzsche provokes us. What if precisely in destruction there was something creative? What if what today you call suffering were, in truth, life's secret work to show you who you really are? When a passion falls apart, hardly anyone emerges unscathed. There's pain, frustration, sensation of loss, but looking more deeply, we perceive that what was lost wasn't just the other, but the illusions we sustained. Illusions of control, of eternity, of security. Nietzsche would say this collapse is necessary, because only when our masks are burned can we begin building more authentically. Destruction, in this context, isn't punishment, but revelation. Passion reveals our weaknesses, our attachments, our dependencies. It shows how much we project onto the other, what we lack, how much we seek outside what we fear to face inside. This cruel mirror isn't pleasant, but it's profoundly revealing. Because seeing it, we can no longer flee from the essential question, who am I when everything that sustained me crumbles? Nietzsche spoke of the necessity to die and be reborn countless times in life. For him, a worthy existence isn't linear, but made of ruptures, falls, and recreations. Passion, by destroying us, fulfills exactly this role, forces us to die to a version of ourselves that no longer sustains itself. Obliges us to face emptiness, to endure the weight of solitude, to discover we're not just what we desire in the other. How many people, after living devastating passions, don't discover new strengths? A woman who, after a suffocating relationship, learns to cultivate her independence. A man who, after being betrayed, perceives how much he projected childish neediness onto his partner. A youth who, upon losing great love, discovers an artistic or philosophical vocation. Pain, when endured, reveals hidden potencies. Nietzsche never romanticized suffering, but also never treated it as useless. For him, suffering is a constitutive part of life. Fleeing from it is impoverishing existence. And passion, with its destructive intensity, is one of the most powerful paths to make us traverse this transformative suffering. It requires, however, courage not to let ourselves be crushed, not to confuse destruction with end. Because what ends, in truth, is only a way of living, not life itself. In this sense, passion can be seen as a kind of initiation. It initiates us in the experience of losing control, of living at the mercy of greater forces, of being torn from certainties. And by surviving this, we discover a profound truth. We're vaster than we imagined. We can endure more. We can create more. We can reinvent ourselves. Nietzsche would invite us to thank even what wounded us, because wounding is also revelation. A passion's destruction shows what in us was illusion, what in us was mask, what in us was dependency. It throws open our vulnerabilities, but also points to the possibility of a stronger, more authentic, more creative life. And that's why, paradoxically, passion can be a path of liberation, not because it liberates us while it lasts, but because it obliges us to liberate ourselves when it ends. It ruins to rebuild. It devours to reveal. It burns to show what resists fire. In the end, passion destroys, yes, but perhaps it's exactly this destruction we need. Because only those who have fallen can learn to rise differently. Only those who have been consumed by fire can discover which parts of themselves are truly indestructible. After traversing passion's intensity as consuming fire, as torn mask, as prison and as revelation, the inevitable question arises: is it possible to love without being destroyed? Nietzsche didn't believe in easy formulas or happiness recipes. For him, living is being exposed to risk, and passion is one of the most inevitable and fascinating risks. However, there's a way to face this risk without losing oneself in it. Transform passion into creative force instead of passively accepting its destructive face. The first step is understanding that loving isn't synonymous with annulling oneself. When desire becomes prison, the individual disappears to live according to the other. This isn't love, it's dependency. Nietzsche would say such a life is diminished life, because will to power was diverted outward, to someone's domain who isn't us. Loving without being devoured requires remaining whole before surrender. It's being with the other without abdicating oneself. This doesn't mean coldness or distance, but conscious intensity. It's the difference between fire that burns uncontrollably and flame that illuminates a path. Passion can be lived without falling into obsession's abyss, if we learn to endure its force without transforming it into chains. Nietzsche would call this an exercise in greatness, loving creatively, loving as one who affirms life instead of fleeing from it. But how does this translate into daily life? Imagine someone living overwhelming passion. If this person understands love only as possession, sooner or later they'll be devoured by jealousy, by anguish, by fear. But if they face passion as an encounter of forces, as a dance where each preserves their own autonomy, the relationship can become a field of expansion. Instead of suffocating, it strengthens. Instead of imprisoning, it propels. Nietzsche believed every true relationship should be crossed by challenge. Love shouldn't be a place of absolute comfort, but a space of creative confrontation, where each provokes the other to grow. Loving without being devoured, therefore, isn't seeking a feeling without conflicts, but accepting conflicts as part of the process of mutual strengthening. It's seeing the other not as extension of oneself, but as singular force that challenges us to go beyond. In this sense, mature love, that which Nietzsche hinted as possible, is almost a tragic friendship. Two beings who know they can wound each other, but choose to walk together anyway. It's consciousness that passion can destroy, but can also reveal and build. And that it's up to us to decide if we'll be slaves to this fire, or if we'll learn to dance with it. For Nietzsche, humanity's great task isn't avoiding pain, but giving meaning to it. Loving without being devoured doesn't mean escaping falls, but learning to use them as steps. When passion becomes obsession, we need to ask, what is this obsession trying to teach me? When jealousy explodes, we should ask, what fear is being exposed in me? When loss's pain traverses me, we must ask, what new forces are emerging from this emptiness? Loving without being devoured is therefore loving with tragic consciousness. It's knowing we can fall, but still choosing to love. It's accepting the other can leave, but still surrendering to encounter. It's living passion as inevitable risk, but also as possibility of growth. This posture doesn't eliminate pain, but transforms pain into path. In the end, Nietzsche wouldn't invite us to reject passion, but to endure it, not to deny it, but to traverse it, not to destroy it, but to recreate it. Because true love, that which doesn't devour, is what's born from encounter between two beings who affirm themselves fully, without annulling themselves, without imprisoning themselves, without losing themselves. It's love that strengthens in intensity, but doesn't extinguish in obsession. And perhaps that's the final lesson. Loving without being devoured isn't loving less, but loving differently. A more courageous, more creative, more conscious way. It's transforming passion's risk into opportunity for revelation and potency. It's ultimately choosing life with all its pains and abysses and still saying, yes, I want. We've traversed together passion's journey according to Nietzsche. The consuming fire, the torn mask, the power game, desire's prison, destruction that reveals, and finally, the possibility of loving without being devoured. What seemed merely a love story showed itself in truth, a deep mirror of the human condition. Because deep down, passion isn't about the other. It's about us, about our forces, our weaknesses, our illusions, and the courage to face the abyss we carry within. Nietzsche never promised us comfort. On the contrary, he provoked us to live intensely, to endure passion's pain as an inevitable part of life. And if there's something we learned from him, it's that destruction doesn't need to be the end, but can be the beginning of transformation. Passion tears away our masks, imprisons us, devours us, but also reveals us. And when we endure this revelation, we discover the possibility of loving creatively, without losing ourselves. Now I leave a question for you to reflect. What was the passion that most destroyed you? And what did it teach you about who you really are? What city are you watching from? Comment down below and let us know. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and share this journey with someone who needs to hear this message today.